Hey everybody, Sue's here from Revelation Quilts. Check out this awesome masterpiece behind me. I am super excited to show you how to make this. There is a written pattern available if you're interested at revelationquilts.com, and I'm super excited to show it to you. Let's get started right now. So for this project, I'm going to be using 4 charm packs of a darker color and 4 charm packs of a lighter color. For my darker color, I have 4 charm packs from Robert Kaufman. It's the Gustav Klimt collection. And I chose these not only because I love them, but because they're all dark. There's no light ones in here. And then for my light ones, I'm choosing the Island Batiks. 2 of these are the Feed Sack, and 2 of them are the Freedom Lights Batik. But they're all in the same colorway. So that just happens to be what I had. I'm also going to be using this Missouri Star hexagon template. And I'll show this against some black so you can see what it looks like. The nice thing about this template is it measures 5 inches by 2.5 inches. So what makes that great is it can be used for charm squares. I can get 2 half hexis out of a charm square by cutting my charm square in half, first of all, and then just, cutting off these little corners. I also really like that it's got this straight edge along here, which when you go to sew your half hexis together, that covers the seam allowance. So that's really great. The other thing great about using this template is that you can use jelly rolls also for this pattern. So you can just lay that template right on your jelly roll, make your cuts, and then flip it over. And there's a lot less waste using a jelly roll because you're not cutting off these corners. These corners that you cut, you're using them on the next cut when you turn that template over. So there's less waste with a jelly roll. However, I decided to use the charm squares because I just really love these charm squares. You can also use layer cakes for this pattern. You just cut your layer cakes basically into charm squares. So you get 4 charm squares out of a layer cake. This works best if you use charm packs that don't have the pinked edges. Like batiks generally don't have pinked edges, but I'm going to show you how to cut these charm squares so that you can eliminate the pinked edges in your charm squares. So let's get cutting. So we're going to start with the charm squares that do not have the pinked edges. It's very easy. You just put your template on here with the long side right down the middle of your charm square, and then just make your cut down the center. So I found that it was really helpful to cut all of my charm squares in half first. You can use a regular ruler or you can use your template, either way. And then once I have them cut in half, it really helps to use a rotating cutting mat on this too. So once I have them cut in half, I can just place my template on there. The sides are straight with this straight edge of the template. And then all I have to do is just cut off these little triangles like this and turn my cutting mat and then cut off that side. So then I've got my perfect little half hexie there. Now, if you're going to use your pinked edges, it's going to start off the same way. You can use your regular ruler, just measure. I would measure your whole charm square first and see how much bigger it is with those pinked edges. So I know that my 5 inches is in the valleys of my pinked edges. So when I cut this in half, I'm going to put my 2.5 line just on the inside of the pinked edges. And then I know that that will be cut in half when I go to cut it. Now, when I go to use my template, I'm going to put the edge that I've just cut without the pinked edges. I'm going to line my template, the long side, along that straight edge without the pinked edges. And then you can see how much bigger this charm square was with those pinked edges. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm basically going to cut off my pinked edges like this, and then turn it, cut off my other corner, and then I can cut off this short edge. And so then I've basically cut off all my pinked edges, and I've got my perfect little half hexes, and I don't have to worry about the pinked edges. The reason I don't want the pinked edges on here is it skews the size of my half hexie. So when I go to sew my hexes together in columns, it's going to line up perfectly, and I don't have to worry about excess edges when I sew them together. My seam allowances are going to line up perfectly, just like that. So that is how I cut them all. All of the charm squares or layer cakes or jelly rolls will all be cut into these half hexes. So I'm going to cut them all up, and then I'll be ready to lay out the pattern. Okay, so I want to show you how to start putting this quilt together. This quilt is built in columns of 6. So you've got vertical columns of 6 columns across, and you'll do 5 vertical columns of 6. Every column of 6 is exactly the same. Now I've got a small little worksheet here on how to build your columns, and I'll put that as a free download to help you get started. It'll just like get you started so you know how to place the columns. But here's a couple things to remember, is that every column alternates between a dark color and a light color. So if you just look down any individual column here, you'll see that there's a dark, a light, a dark, a light. And of course, since they're half hexes, they all fit together. Now every column also has, no, I have to start over when I say that. The first column starts with 22 pieces down. So if I start from the top and count every piece, I have 22, and it takes up most of my design wall. Column number 2 just follows the opposite. So you can see this is the short side, and so the short side of column 2 butts up with that. Column 3 is a little different because you're going to be staggering your pieces. So that little cheat sheet I have will help you. The other thing that's really important is that you should, when you cut your half hexes, be sure and keep your pairs together. So as I've cut my half hexes, I've got I'm keeping the same pairs next to each other. That's going to be real important, because as you're putting your columns together, you will want to match up these pairs when you put them in. So I know that in column 3, I'll have a matching pair in column 4 that will fall together so that it kind of makes this S shape. And then if your lights have any patterns on them or anything like that, I'm using a batik, and there's just enough of a pattern in some of these batiks that I've had to keep those pairs together too. And the batiks will match up as well between different columns, but your S's will be going the opposite way as the dark colors like that. So you'll build your column of 6, and you'll also sew these together in columns of 6 as well. And then when you put the whole quilt together, you'll just sew your 6 columns. You'll sew your 5 columns of 6 each together. So when I sew this together, I'm just going to take this piece and put it right sides together. Oh, I dropped it. Sorry about that. I'll take this piece and put them right sides together with this piece. If you've ever made a kaleidoscope quilt, you'll be familiar with this technique, and you'll just sew a 1/4 inch along there, and then this will be one whole column. You'll sew column 1 to column 2, column 2 to column 3, etc. until you've got your column, your one column of 6 columns, if that makes sense. Now also keep in mind that starting my next column, which will be column number 1 again, I've had to keep these in pairs, so I know that this matches this one up here. So I know that when I sew my column 1 there, I will need to have the matching pair in this column. So these are little tips and tricks that will help you put this together. I 100% recommend having a design wall when making this quilt, because it's going to be too hard on the floor or a table. Just to have it up in a place where you can match things up is super important. So this is my first column of 6, and I'm getting ready to start my second column here. I know this will be row number 1 of my second column, and I will have to match these pieces up next to this when I make my new column like that. So hopefully that will help get you started. And I'm going to sew these together now so that I have my column of 6. And then let's see, there's 6 times 2. So each column should measure 12 inches across, finished once you're done sewing. So I'm going to get this column sewn together, and I'm going to start on my second column of 6 after that. Okay, so as you can see, I've got my first column of 6 all sewn together, and I'm getting ready for column number 1 of my second set of 6 columns. And I know that these darks go here because they match up with column number 6 of my first set. So I know that this will continue the pattern going forward. Now all I have to do is fill in these with my light color. And I know from my first strip here of the column set that these white ones, or these light ones, don't need to match up with anything. So I can take my pairs and just disperse them down this row, if that makes sense. Now, an extra little note to keep in mind that with the 4 charm packs I'm using of each light and dark, I know that columns 1, 2, 4, and 5 all have 22 pieces in each column. Columns 3 and column 6 have 23 pieces in them. So that's just so you know you're right on track when you are putting these together. Another thing to note is that as you're sewing your columns together to make this strip set, you need to know where to start sewing on each one. So as you can see, some of these little column sets are taller than the other ones. That's because I need to make that imaginary line going across the top so that when I trim it, I know where. And so as you're sewing your column strips together, it's very, very helpful to pin them so you know that you're getting them lined up exactly where you want them to be. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in these spaces where I know that a white strip will go. And so it's really helpful when building your columns across in columns of 6 to just start this way. So you have, you know, so I'll go this way until I have 6 across. Then, since I know that every column is an alternate black, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, I can just fill them in going right on down until I have the right number of pieces in each column. So it's really helpful to build this way until you get your pattern established. Then you can just fill in up and down. So that's a little helpful trick that I've picked up as I went along. So I wanted to give you a little tip when sewing your columns together. The first 2 columns, when you sew them together, it's real easy because these seams match up perfectly. On one column, all the seams are going down. On the second column, all the seams are going up. So I can nest these seams. Now, on the third one that I want to sew on here, it's going to be a little more difficult because it's not perfectly lined up like this. It's offset like this. So because I know that these two fabrics are the same, and this is forming that kind of S going down in my light fabrics. So the only seams I really have to worry about are these right here, this one, and there's another one here. So it's really every other seam. And these are a little harder to match up because if I were to match it up perfectly along the seam, when it comes down, when it gets sewn together, it's going to have a 1/4 inch gap like this, and it's not going to match up perfectly. So when I'm putting this over to sew it together, what I need to do is I need to overlap these seams by about a 1/4 inch. And I promise you that even when you do this, they are not all going to come out perfectly. So I'm going to put this pin in here about a 1/4 inch away from the edge, just to kind of give you an idea of where that seam will end up then when you sew it together. And so I can look at that and say, okay, that's a little off. So I'm going to overlap it a little bit more, put my pin in there and just play with it. My 1/4 inch seam is going to be probably a little smaller than yours. So I pinned it and I'm going to peel it back about a 1/4 inch away. And so now that seam matches up really well. So that gives me an indication of where I need, how much I need to overlap those two seams in order to get a straight edge. And so I'm just going to put my pin right in there. And I'm not going to do that all the way down because once I get this first one done, the rest of them are pretty much going to fall in line as long as I've used a 1/4 inch along all of my seams. So when you get these all sewn together and realize that not all of your seams match up perfectly, please don't fret and please don't rip them out and do them again, because in the grand scheme of this quilt, I promise you that my seams are not perfect. But when you look at them, unless you look at them with a microscope, you are not going to be able to see those seams that don't work out well. And none of them are off by more than, I would say, 1/8 or less of an inch. So just I highly recommend that you pin where your seams come together. And then don't fret if they don't all match up perfectly, please. So give yourself some grace and just continue on. All right, so I've got all of my columns sewn together, but if you take a look at the top of this quilt, the bottom looks the exact same way down there, but just a different pattern, obviously. But if you take a look at this, the sides are straight because of the way our half hexis work, but the top needs to be trimmed. So I can take a line starting about here and just go straight across and trim that so that it will be straight across on the top, and then I'll do the same thing to the bottom. So that is how I'm going to square up my quilt. So it's really easy to do that. And if you've ever done a kaleidoscope quilt, it's much of the same process. But if you haven't done a kaleidoscope quilt, it's just very easy. You just take that line, just put your ruler along that line to catch fabric all along the top and the bottom with no gaps, and you will be fine. And then once you have that straight edge, you can add your border, or if you don't want a border, you can just put your binding on there. Just like that. This quilt is going to be epic. By the way, as long as I'm here, I want to shout out my members on this channel for making all of this possible. Their contributions every month really, really help me out, and it just makes a huge difference that you don't even realize, if you're a member, how much of a difference these make. So thank you to all of my members. Let's get this squared up. Okay, so I've got my quilt lined up here, and it might be really hard to see with this clear ruler, but I'm looking at these intersections like this, and I'm going to put my 1/4 inch ruler, my 1/4 inch line right on that intersection. You might be able to see it better on this one. So I'm just going to go across and get that straight, and it's not a fast cut, so I'm going to take it slow and make sure that my ruler is exactly where I want it to be, and I'm just going to cut right across there. I think I'll put a weight on my ruler just so it doesn't budge when I'm cutting. And I'm gonna just start my cut here and go across as far as I can get. And I'll take those away. So now you can see where I made that cut, and then I will just scooch everything down this way and reset everything so it is straight. The camera may have moved a little bit. So, and then I'm just gonna keep going across until I've got my entire straight edge ready to cut, just like that. And that's all there is to it to get your straight edge. Okay, so I've got my top and my bottom squared off. This is an awesome quilt. It was a lot of work, but I love the end result. So I've got my 5 columns of 6, my 5 strip sets of 6 columns, or vertical rows, as you say, I guess. And the entire quilt measures 60 across by 74 down. So it's a good size quilt, and I'm super excited because I am now thinking of how I'm going to quilt this. I am not going to put a border on this. I'm just going to add a binding, and I got some of this same fabric to bind it with. So I'm super, super excited about this one. If you want to make this bigger, you would just add another column of 6. If you want it wider, if you want it longer, you would just add more half hexis going vertically up and down. So now I do have a cheat sheet that you can follow if you want to just get the pattern. It's for pattern placement only. Otherwise, there is a written pattern available for purchase at www.revelationquilts.com, and it is a digital download, so you can purchase the pattern, and then it's just sent right to your email address as a PDF file, and you can print it up from there. So thanks for watching. This was super fun to make. I'm super excited to get it quilted, get it on my long arm, and get it quilted. So thanks a bunch for watching, everybody. Have a great day.